Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today for our first Cosmoverse training series session with Professor Olga Mena. Thank you, Olga, for accepting our invitation today. Cosmoverse, as you may know, is a network of over 400 researchers in Europe and over 600 globally, with the aim of unifying efforts in confronting the question of cosmological tensions and understanding how different parts of physics can contribute to that effort. Professor Olga Mena is currently a permanent researcher at the Instituto de Física Corpuscular at the University of Valencia. She obtained her PhD from the Autonomous University of Madrid in theoretical physics under the supervision of Professor Belén Gavela in 2002, where she was awarded the Excellence PhD Prize. She has had research positions at the University of Rome and at Fermilab National Laboratory. Olga has also been PI and co-PI on several national research projects in Spain, as well as being involved in 4 EU projects. She is a member of the SDSS Consortium, the SKA, and the June Experiment, and is currently supervising 3 PhD students on top of 5 previous students. In this first training session, she will present the latest approaches to neutrino cosmology. Olga, please start in your own time.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be today here with you. And as Jackson has said, I will tell you about cosmology and neutrinos, okay? So neutrinos have provided the first robust evidence to look for physics beyond the standard model. Why? Because within the standard model, they are massless particles, okay? So in 2015, the Nobel Prize was awarded to Kajita and McDonald for the discovery of neutrino oscillations, which shows that neutrinos have mass. And neutrinos can tell us really about our current understanding of the universe, its fate, and also its evolution, okay? I think that there is no further reason to motivate more the important role of the neutrinos play in cosmology. But here I show you some examples from the Forbes magazine highlighting the important effect that neutrinos have in cosmology, okay? So today, current cosmological observations point to the fact that we are living in the so-called lambda-CDM universe, where basically we have 2 main components, that is dark matter amounting up to 25% of the total mass energy density, and dark energy amounting to roughly 70% of the total mass energy density. Neutrinos should contribute between 0.1 and 0.3%. But how much precisely is the question we want to answer. And it's a crucial question because they are crucial particles to understand the evolution of the universe, okay? How dark matter is distributed in the universe. Apart from that, we have also heavy elements, stars, the cosmic microwave background, and hydrogen and helium in a 4% more or less composition. So here is a brief outline of my talk, of these lectures today. I will start with a brief introduction, okay? With describing the main ingredients and the thermal history of the universe, and then we'll get into the neutrino cosmology. We'll see a neutrino decoupling in the early universe, Big Bang nucleosynthesis and the number of effective neutrino species, cosmology and the number of effective neutrino species, neutrino masses and cosmology, and the take-home messages, okay? So the standard cosmology refers to the usual Friedmann-Lemaitre-Robertson-Walker metric, okay? And it's based on 2 elements, okay? The geometry, that is the metric, okay, which determines the geodesics, and the dynamics, which are described by the Friedmann equation, okay, which tell us how is the curvature of the space-time accordingly to the components of the universe, okay? So this geometry, the Friedmann-Lemaitre-Robertson-Walker geometry, assumes that at large scales, the universe is homogeneous and isotropic. So why we know that the universe is isotropic? So the most robust confirmation of the isotropy of the universe at large scales is the one provided by the CMB, the cosmic microwave background radiation, and it's the fact that when we measure the sky temperature in any direction, we basically measure the same temperature. It has a black body spectrum with a temperature of 2.725 Kelvin. This has been measured with extreme accuracy by the spectrophotometer FIRAS of the NASA COBE satellite. Here I show you this spectrum, okay, this black body spectrum with 400 error bars. So it's basically a perfect black body spectrum. There are, however, small fluctuations in the temperature across the sky in this perfect temperature, right, of about 1 part in 100,000, okay? These fluctuations are of the order of the 10 to the minus 5. We'll see these fluctuations soon, right? These are the so-called CMB temperature anisotropies. But for the moment, keep in mind that the CMB is the major proof that we have of the isotropy of the universe, okay? So the discovery was very nice because it was a completely an accidental discovery, no? Penzias and Wilson were working together for the Bell laboratories, and they were testing an antenna, and they discovered a noise that was present everywhere. So this was a major discovery. But the funniest thing is that it was predicted by Alfred and Hermann in 1948, very nearby, okay? Because they were working 40 miles away, basically. The theoretical guys from the experimental ones from the Penzias and Wilson one, okay? So this radiation have a mean temperature of 2.725 Kelvin. So, however, as I told you before, there are fluctuations. And as you can see here, these are of the order of micro Kelvin, right? Here below. And what this map is telling us is how the CMB temperature varies with the angular sizes of patches in the sky, okay? So, and you will tell me, but why is the origin of these fluctuations? So these fluctuations are due to acoustic oscillations in the baryon photon fluid before recombination. Before recombination, baryons and photons are tightly coupled and they behave as a unique fluid. As gravity tries to compress the fluid, the radiation pressure resists. And then there is this competition always in the early universe between gravity and pressure, okay? And then we will have these oscillations that will be translated in these hot and cold spots in the CMB maps. The potential wells, which are associated to high density regions, right, baryon regions, right, will be associated to cold spots because photons will lose energy while climbing out from these gravitational potential wells. On the other hand, the potential hills, which are associated to low density regions, will be associated to hot spots in the CMB maps. And we can see these cold and hot spots in these beautiful temperature maps measured by WMAP and also by Planck, right? There are 410 CMB photons per centimeter cube, or if you prefer, in American units, roughly 7,000 photons per inch cube, okay? So let me tell you more. What about the homogeneity of the universe? Because we know that the universe is isotropy. We know about the isotropy of the universe due to the CMB. But how do we know that it's homogeneous? So at distances larger than 100 megaparsecs, galaxy surveys indicate that the universe is homogeneous. That is, that galaxies and clusters of galaxies are equally distributed in the sky in all possible directions. And we have measured this precisely now with SDSS with the SDSS Galaxy Survey. We have seen, right, this distribution, this pie chart that here I'm showing you, right, this distribution of quasars, galaxies of different types, like, for instance, luminous red galaxies, bright galaxies, emission line galaxies. We have seen this beautiful homogeneity of the universe in this distribution of galaxies. So the universe is isotropic and homogeneous. The metric, what does the metric? The metric connects the value of the coordinates to the more physical measure of the interval, what is called the proper time, where dx0 refers to the time zero component, to the timeline component, and the last three, ijk, normally, are spatial coordinates, okay? And the metric is necessarily symmetric. Notice that in special relativity, right, the metric is just the Minkowski metric. But in an expanding, homogeneous, and isotropic universe, the metric is the Friedmann-Lemaitre-Robertson-Walker one, okay? And here I show you. And if K, this factor there, is 0, the universe is flat. And we have just one factor, which is the scale factor, okay? And tell us how the universe expands, okay? In time, or in cosmic time, which is redshift, okay? Very good. So the spatial geometry, therefore, depends on the curvature. If K is equal 1, we will have a 3-sphere, which means that if an alien with 2 light rays, the light rays will reach him from the back or her from the back, okay? In a flat universe, they will be parallel and will never be back. And in an open universe, these 2 light rays will diverge, okay? So the Friedmann-Robertson-Walker metric tells us how to measure distances in these 3 possible geometries, okay? So how do we measure distances? And what is the most important concept of these geometries? The geodesics, right? And the geodesics refers to the path of a particle in the absence of any external force, okay? Obviously, in the Minkowski metric, the geodesics will be a straight line, okay? But in an expanding universe, we should use the Christoffel symbols, this capital gamma, which are derivatives of the metric, okay? And the 0 component of the geodesic equation is this one, that in the last row, that is just telling us that as the universe expands, the energy goes as 1/8, okay? So this means that the wavelength of the radiation and of the particle when the universe expands gets stretched, right? And therefore they lose energy, okay? This is the most important thing I wanted to keep you in mind, okay? The energy goes as 1/8, okay? The dynamics. So the dynamics, general relativity, what does it do? What does it do? What does is that it relates the metric with the matter and energy content in the universe, and the scale factor will depend on the matter energy density content of the universe. In other words, matter and energy will tell us how the geometry of the space-time is curved via the Einstein equation. So I'm sure you have seen this equation many times, right? Where R mu nu is the Ricci tensor, okay? And it seems very tedious to compute these, but they are very easy because many of them are 0, right? Due to the metric that we have. So I put you again the symbols of the Christoffel, I put you again the expression of the Christoffel symbols, and you should keep in mind that we will have 2 Friedmann equations, okay? The first Friedmann equation is the one that tells us how the Hubble expansion rate of the universe happens, right? Where rho critical is given by this expression. And the second Friedmann equation treats as the second derivative of the scale factor over the scale factor, and tell us how the universe accelerates, right? So notice here that it depends on rho plus 3p. So to have an accelerated expansion, we need that the acceleration is positive. And we need that rho plus 3p should be smaller than 0. That is, that to have an accelerating universe, we need a fluid with negative pressure. And this is what we know we have today with the dark energy. In the absence of external forces, the energy momentum tensor is conserved. So in an expanding universe, this means that the energy momentum tensor conservation implies, right, that the covariant derivative is equal to 0. And here is how we infer, by imposing that the covariant derivative of the energy momentum is 0, is how we infer how the different components evolve with the scale factor of the universe, okay? So if you work out this expression, which is very easy because basically many of the Christoffel symbols are 0, they vanish, right? So you will see that matter goes as a to the minus 3. And think about this. This is normal because it just goes as a cube will go, right? I mean, just a cube, right? A to the minus 3, 1 over a cube. Radiation, however, has pressure. So it will go as a to the minus 4. And dark energy will go as a to the minus 3, 1 plus. Okay? So the first Friedmann equation can be written as this, But we will have different components here. Dark matter, which is the sum of baryonic and non-baryonic dark matter, which is the sum of dark matter and baryonic matter, okay, and goes as a to the minus 3. Radiation, which is the sum of photons plus the dark radiation, that is our neutrinos, and goes to as a to the minus 4. And dark energy, which will go as 3, 1 plus that, okay? Also, of course, we can have a non-zero curvature perturbation, and it will go as a to the minus 2, okay? So we have now defined all the different components in the first Friedman equation, okay? So in a flat universe, the mass energy density of matter, radiation, and dark energy today should be 1, okay? In an open universe, the curvature contribution is positive, and then the sum of these three components will be smaller than 1. And in a closed universe, the curvature contribution will be negative, and therefore the sum of these three components will be larger than. Current cosmological observations, however, indicate that the universe has a geometry very, very, very close to the flat one. So in the following, we will work with a flat universe, okay? Unless I explore some cases with a positive or negative curvature, but it won't be the case. So radiation. What do I mean with radiation? I want to mean photons and neutrinos. So the cosmic microwave background radiation temperature, as I said before, is 2.725 Kelvin, and the energy of such a photon is given by the integral of the Bose-Einstein distribution times E or equal P, because they are massless. So this is how we infer the contribution of photons to the total mass energy density, this 4.75 times 10 to the minus 5 over a to the 4. It's not a miracle, it's just the integral, right? Rho gamma is the integral of the Bose-Einstein distribution times the momentum. Neutrinos follow they are fermions, so they follow the Fermi-Dirac distribution. So we will shortly see that the temperature today is not the same than photons, but we will see it later. If we assume that neutrinos are massless, right, the energy density is 1.78 times 10 to the minus 5 over h squared, a to the fourth. However, we know today from neutrino oscillation experiments that neutrinos are massive particles. So this means that their mass energy density is given by the product of the number density times the mass divided by rho critical. So data tell us that this is between 0.6% and 3% roughly, okay? Let's see how big is it. So baryons, the baryon temperature is, the baryon contribution is inferred from CMB experiments, basically. We know that today is 0.022, that the baryon density times h squared is 0.022 from CMB anisotropies. There are other methods as Quasar spectra or light element abundances, but it's very, very well measured by CMB observations, as we will see. Dark matter contributes to 0.12 basically. And how do we know? Well, we know this via galaxy rotation curve, CMB, gravitational lensing, large scale structure, right? And moreover, these observations tell us that the amount of dark matter is in its majority should be cold, okay? Okay, dark energy. In 1998, when you were babies, right, two independent groups observed that tight supernova 1A were fainter than in principle they should be in a universe with just matter. So it was needed an additional ingredient in the universe to make it to expand in an accelerated way. And today we know that the accelerated expansion of the universe is between 2.4 and 4.6 sigma, but with all data collected, is 11.12 sigma, the significance for an accelerated universe. Can you imagine? It's really robust. So here, a brief history of the universe. We have time goes there, right? And then we have redshift, which increases. We are in the lambda domination period. We have a radiation dominated, a matter domination period, and a lambda domination period with a matter radiation equality and a matter lambda equality, okay? And then we see where these things happen. So big bang nucleosynthesis happen in the radiation-dominated universe, large-scale CMB in the matter-dominated universe, and matter radiation equality between matter and radiation, radiation and matter, and then structure formation, of course, in the matter-dominated period, okay? Very good. So here, another brief history of the universe in just one slide. So there was an early period of inflation, then we have the possible matter relics. Then in the first 3 minutes of the universe, we have the BBN, right? The Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Then when the universe was 100,000 years old, the CMB, and then just recently, right, structure formation, right? So very good. So let's start now with, after this brief introduction, let's start now with the neutrino stuff. Let's go in and neutrino decoupling in the early universe, okay? So we are here, right? Neutrino decoupling, which happens when the universe was 1 MeV, had 1 MeV temperature and was 1 second old, okay? So a very easy, you have seen this many times, straightforward Hall-Waving rule to compute the freeze out of a particle is that the decoupling of a particle is that when the expansion thermally average interaction rate, gamma, is smaller than the expansion rate of the universe. So you know that neutrinos interact only via weak interactions with a rate given by the square of the Fermi constant times given times T to the 5, given the fact that we are thermally averaging this cross section. The expansion rate is given by the Hubble factor and therefore is proportional to T to the 4 over M Planck square, and therefore these two quantities should be almost equal or equivalent when the temperature of the universe is around 1 MeV. Therefore, neutrinos decouple from 1 MeV around when the temperature of the universe was 1 MeV or the universe was 1 second. These neutrinos don't inherit any of the energy associated to electron-positron annihilation because shortly after neutrino decoupling, the temperature of the universe drops below the electron mass, and therefore electron-positron annihilation takes place. This entropy released by electron-positron annihilation is transferred to photons, but not to neutrinos because they have already decoupled. Therefore, they are colder than photons today. How are they related, the temperatures? So let's see. So electron-positron annihilation takes place after neutrino decoupling. In an expanding universe, the entropy density per comoving volume is conserved. So we have the boson's contribution, which is 2 pi squared T to the cube over 45, and the fermions entropy contribution, which is 7 over 8 times the boson's entropy contribution. Before electron-positron annihilation, we have electrons, positrons, neutrinos, antineutrinos, and photons. And therefore, the entropy density is given by this expression here. After, only we have neutrinos and antineutrinos and photons, because electrons and positrons have annihilated, but photons and neutrinos will be at a different temperature. If we equal these two entropy densities, we will get that the temperature of the neutrino over the temperature of the photon is 4 over 11 to the 1/3. Therefore, these neutrinos today are colder than photons, okay? So the total radiation in the universe can be written as the photon contribution plus the dark radiation contribution. In the standard scenario, where only 3 neutrinos are present, we have that the N effective is 30.44 plus minus 0.002. And now I explain you why it's not 3, okay? Because there are processes in the early universe which change these 3, okay? But there could be also less neutrinos. Neutrinos could decay. Or more neutrinos, there could be additional neutrino species. Okay, so how do we know this? Okay, and then you will tell me, and stellar neutrinos, how can they be stellar neutrinos? If they don't interact with anyone, how do we know they exist? Because they contribute to gravity, okay? And nothing can escape from gravity, okay? So, normally, okay, there are 3 approximations when one computes the the neutrino decoupling in the early universe, which are not fully correct, okay? First of all, the ideal gas approximation, to assume that all particle species behave as ideal gases, the ideal gas approximation. The second approximation is made is the instantaneous decoupling approximation. And it's the fact that it's normally assumed that the neutrino and the QED quantum electrodynamic sectors transit from a state of tight thermal contact to a state of zero thermal contact. And this is not true, of course. And then the third approximation is the ultra-relativistic approximation that assumes that the electron-positron sector is fully ultra-relativistic at the time of neutrino decoupling. Let's start with this one, with the ultra-relativistic approximation. This approximation, right, leads to a correction of plus 0.04, as you can see there, okay? So it's not true that the temperature of decoupling over ME tends to infinity, because as you have seen, the temperature of decoupling of neutrinos is very close to electron mass. So this is not well satisfied, okay? And this implies a correction to an effective of 0.04, not negligible at all, okay? Very good. So, sorry, the second approximation is to assume that we have an ideal gas. But of course, this is not true, because we have electromagnetic interactions, right, between electrons and photons. And this will modify the quantum electrodynamics equation of state, okay? So, interacting, there are effects at finite temperatures that are not encountered at zero temperature, okay? So when we add these finite temperature corrections to QED corrections to the equation of state of the QED plasma, we have a departure from an ideal gas, okay? And these corrections, right, of this type of diagrams, of this type of diagrams, and of this type of diagrams, sorry, will contribute to this plus 0.01 and basically, right? So there will be another contribution. Also, neutrino and electron-positron annihilations are processes quite close in time, right? So, I mean, there are relic interactions still. This is another approximation to assume that they are completely coupled. No, there are relic interactions between electron, positons, and neutrinos. And these interactions will affect to neutrinos with larger momenta, okay? And will lead to distortions. And this will lead to a correction of minus 0.05 in the number of neutrino species, okay? And here I show you these distortions, right, with respect to the relativistic Fermi-Dirac, which are largest in the case of the electron neutrino, nu E here, right, real nu E, the green line, right? So these departures are larger for electron neutrinos and antineutrinos, but they imply also a change in this number. So this is why instead of having 3, we have this 30.44. Of course, we have also the corrections due to flavor oscillations, to neutrino oscillations. And these are of the order of 5 times 10 to the minus 4 due to the solar mixing angle. We are going to see this later. There has been quite discussion in the literature recently, because these authors claim that the number was not 30.44, that due to a diagram that was not computed properly, was the number is 30.43, okay? But then there was another work by Jackson and Lane, that they say that no, that this is much smaller, the contribution that the others claim that is plus 0.07. And then finally, they claim that the correction is a factor of 30 smaller, that it doesn't mind, and is no 0.044. For 3 is 0.44, as I tell you in the very beginning. So this discussion about this 0.04, 3.044, and 3.043 is maybe irrelevant now, but it can be important, since in the future, maybe, who knows, we reach this precision in measuring an effective. So we could even test the theory with cosmological measurement, the theory behind these neutrino decoupling processes. So I told you that these neutrinos are colder than photons, right? and their mean temperature today is 1.6 times 10 to the minus 4 eV. And if these neutrinos are massive, their energy density, at T much smaller than their mass, is given by the product of their mass times the number density. The number density is 56 particles per centimeter cube, and the sum of the neutrinos will contribute to the total mass energy density of the universe as the sum plus 93,100. So one can really have a very straightforward bound on the neutrino mass, just imposing that neutrinos don't overclose the universe. And then one gets that the sum of the masses should be smaller than 45 eV. However, how do we compute this? So how do we get this? So as I told you, there is no magic here in the numbers. You integrate the Fermi-Dirac distribution for neutrinos, and you will get that is 56 particles per centimeter cube. After, you can compute the product of the masses times the number density, and you will get this number that I showed you. Okay, so as an exercise, you can do this. Okay, so as I have told you, these neutrinos decoupled from the early universe when they were extremely relativistic. Therefore, they are hot thermal relics with very large velocity dispersions. So the thermal motion is the ratio of the momentum over their mass, and is roughly 150 eV over the mass kilometers per second, which, if we have a neutrino of 1 eV mass, this thermal motion is comparable to the typical velocity dispersion of a galaxy. Okay, here I show you the penguin galaxy. You can build your own penguin galaxy, okay? However, we know that in the universe, there are smaller objects, as dwarf galaxies, where the velocity dispersion is much smaller. This means that neutrinos have too much thermal energy to be squeezed into small volumes to form the smaller structures we observe today, which implies that neutrinos, okay, will not contribute to the small scale clustering in the universe. And this is super important. Keep this in mind, okay? They are completely different from cold dark matter, okay? Since they cannot be squeezed into a small volume, okay? They cannot contribute to a structure formation at a small scales, okay? Very good. So, according to standard cosmology, there is a cosmic neutrino background equivalent to the CMB, albeit slightly colder with a mean temperature of 1.9495 Kelvin. There are 340 neutrinos per centimeter cube, and these cosmic neutrinos have never been detected, okay? So the universe is filled with a dense flux of relic neutrinos from the Big Bang. This makes neutrinos the most abundant form of hot dark matter. So when we say that we don't know what dark matter is, we are lying, because we know that neutrinos are hot dark matter, okay? This is what we know from cosmology. What do we know from neutrinos, oscillation physics? So from neutrino oscillation physics, we know that there are at least two massive neutrinos, Dirac or Majoran, okay? We cannot tell if they are Dirac or Majoran. And we know that they are ordering in either this way, normal ordering or inverted ordering. In normal ordering, the solar splitting is the lowest. In inverted ordering, the solar splitting is the highest, okay? But we don't know if the spectrum is normal or inverted, okay? We don't know. And this is accordingly to neutrino oscillation physics. So what we know about from neutrino oscillation physics is that two neutrinos have a mass above 88 eV, and at least one of these neutrinos have a mass above 50 millielectron volts, okay? So two neutrinos should have a mass larger than 8 millielectron volts, and one of these neutrinos should have a mass larger than 50 millielectrons, okay? So neutrino oscillation physics tells to cosmology what is the minimum neutrino mass, okay? So in the normal ordering is above 0.06, in the inverted ordering above 0.1. And this is very important, because if tomorrow cosmology finds that the neutrino mass is below what we expect from neutrino oscillations, there will be a tension, and what happens then? That maybe we have exotic physics in the neutrino sector. or the minimal lambda CDM model is not so minimal, okay? So let's come back now and let's see how Big Bang nucleosynthesis what Big Bang nucleosynthesis can tell us about the effective number of neutrino species, okay? So we are here now, Big Bang nucleosynthesis, in the first 3 minutes of the universe, okay? So we are here when nuclei form, okay? Big Bang nucleosynthesis. So Big Bang nucleosynthesis predicts the abundances of deuterium, helium-4, helium-3, and lithium-7, which are fixed in the first 3 minutes of the universe. Since we are inferring the abundances of this experiment, of these elements, at late times, we have to go to low metallicity sites with little evolution, okay? So let's start with helium-4. Helium-4 is measured in low metallicity galactic H2 regions, is produced in stars, is bad because it's produced at late times, but still we use it for cosmological analysis. Deuterium is observed in high-redshift quasi-stellar objects absorption lines. However, it is destroyed in stars. So, but we still is used. Concerning helium-3 is not used for cosmological constraints because it's produced in the solar system. It's only measured in the solar system at high metallicity sites. And lithium-7 is measured in metal-poor stars in our galaxy, but is destroyed in stars and produced by galactic cosmic ray observations, which is not good. Here I show you in this plot the predictions with the curves, the predictions for the helium-4, deuterium, helium-3, and lithium-7 abundances. The width of these curves is related to the uncertainties in the nuclear rates. The vertical band, thin vertical band, shows the measurements of the CMB of the baryon mass energy density. Notice that, and the yellow boxes denote the measurements, the direct measurements of these elements. Notice that there is a perfect agreement, except for lithium-7, because the one of lithium-7 is not in the CMB column, right? It moves. This is the so-called lithium-7 problem, the lithium problem. And it is not clear if it's due to some missing part in the theory or some inconsistency measuring the primordial lithium-7 is still unsolved. It could be also neophysics, okay? But for today, the most important quantity will be helium-4, okay? For an effective, the all important one is helium-4. So here I show you the uncertainties on these elements, and you can see that the one in YP, that is the helium-4, is the lowest one, so we are lucky. So what happens with helium-4 and N-effective, the number of neutrinos? N-effective changes the freeze-out of the weak interactions, the freeze-out temperature of the weak interaction. So if we add more neutrinos, we will have a larger freeze-out temperature, and we will produce a larger helium-4, because the neutron-to-proton ratio will be high. So here I show you YP in the first plot. YP refers to the helium abundance, that as I increase the number of neutrinos from blue to red, the fraction of helium increases, while the deuterium and the lithium-1 remain the same, right? So helium-4 YP, Y sub P, is very important for measuring N-effective. So how do we know N-effective from Big Bang nucleosynthesis? Via helium-4, okay? Via measurements of helium-4, okay? Now let's move on and go to the CMB and N-effective, okay? Very good. We are now here. Wow. In our cosmic trip, we are now when the universe was 100,000 years old, and the temperature of the universe was roughly 0.3 eV. This is known also as photon decoupling, because photons started to freely travel through the universe without interacting with matter, and the CMB is frozen, okay? So we are here, basically, okay? And this is the period of the cosmic microwave background radiation, and let's see how it constrains N-effective. So here I show you a map of the temperature fluctuations for 3.046 neutrinos. This map, as you know, is the contribution of different momentum, right? Different momenta, L equal 2, plus L equal 3, plus L equal 5, plus L equal 20, plus L equal 50, plus L equal 100, plus L equal 500. So we have an spherical harmonic decomposition of the temperature fluctuations with these expansion coefficients, and the angular power spectrum measures the amplitude of the expansion coefficients as a function of, okay? Very good. So I'm sure you have seen this plot many times. These are the so-called CMB temperature anisotropies, okay? And you can see here the data points as measured by the Planck satellite with error bars, together with the best fit point to a lambda CDM universe in the upper plot, in the bottom plot, sorry, in the top plot, sorry, in the bottom plot, we have the departures with respect to the best fit lambda CDM universe. So the modes that are at low L's tell us about the initial conditions in the universe. That is about inflation, because these modes were outside the horizon till very recently, okay? Then we have the first peak, which tell us about the geometry of the universe and also the mass of the neutrinos, and we will see. Then there is the second peak, which is the variometer, and then there are the highest peaks, and those are the ones which are going to tell us about an effective, okay? These higher peaks. Here I'm showing you two plots. The top plot is for 30.46 and the top neutrinos, and the bottom plot is for 6.46 neutrinos. N effective equals 3, N effective equals 6. Can you see any difference? Difficult, right? Even if I put my magnifying glasses, I can't see any difference between these plots. If I do, however, the temperature fluctuations, I can see that they are very different, right? And moreover, these differences are much larger than the size of the error bars. So it's very easy to measure an effective with the CMB, right? So it's elementary, no? However, notice that we are not just measuring one parameter. We are measuring the baryon energy density, the matter energy density, the Hubble parameter, the amplitude of the power spectrum, the scalar spectral index, the reionization optical depth, in such a way that I can change some of these parameters, okay, and get exactly the same in this red line. And you can see a difference between that and the case of N effective equal 3. So it's not elementary at all. And let me tell you something. Here we have W map, here Planck, and here the sky maps. So the only effect that cannot be mimicked by others at low multiples is the anisotropic stress around the third peak. And it's due to the fact that neutrinos are free streaming particles, and they propagate faster than the sound speed in the photon fluid, suppressing the oscillation amplitude of CMB modes that enter the horizon at the radiation peak. However, this is at small multiples, a multiples smaller than 1,000. If we go to the highest multiples, as those measured by the South Pole Telescope, the Atacama Cosmology Telescope, and Planck, we will see that it will change the damping at high multiples. A higher value of N effective will increase the damping. You see that in that plot. As I increase N effective from 2 to 6, there is more and more and more damping. And this is not degenerated with anything except with helium-4, but we are measuring helium via BBN constraints, right? So here I show you, right, this important thing. So in the plot on your left-hand side, you can see when we fix N effective equal 3, and in the right plot when you don't fix N effective. You can see that in the first plot, right, when you include BBN plus CMB, the magenta in the YP plot, the first top plot, right? So you can see that YP is much wider when I change N effective, right, than when I keep it fixed, the magenta region. The others remain the same for the deuterium, helium, and lithium. If you compare these 4 plots with these other 4, you can see that Three of them are basically unchanged, but the one with helium changes a lot because N effective and the helium are very degenerate. So how do we measure N effective from the CMB? From the high multiples. So Planck 2018 temperature and fluctuation and also lensing measurements tell us that N effective is 2.89 plus minus 0.3, basically 3.5, at 95% confidence level. Perfectly consistent with the assumption of N effective equal 3, right? 3 standard neutrinos. So no stellar neutrinos, no neutrino decays. If we add large scale structure information, we have 2.99 plus minus 0.34. And this is perfectly consistent with BBN estimates. More, if we use different datasets and different models, these predictions don't change. You see that they are always the error bars within the N effective equal 3 region, okay? There is one case in which only with the Atacama Cosmology Telescope data, it goes a bit down, but otherwise, and it's still within the 2 sigma region. So in the future, Sternmoos Observatory and CMB stage 4 are expected to measure N effective with a great accuracy. Great. Okay, look at how the current contours from Planck reduce for these future CMB missions. Okay, amazing. Or here you can see also this, right? Compare these three plots with these three, the inner regions which combine BBN with CMB. These ones are for Planck, these ones are for CMB stage 4. Have you seen the improvement that we are going to have? Indeed, we should be able to check this 0.4 for departure, okay, from future observations. Okay, now that we have heard about N effective, now we are going to move to neutrino masses, okay? So now we are still here and we are going to learn how CMB measures neutrino masses, okay? Very good. So still we are here with the photon decoupling, as I tell you this, the CMB is frozen here. Okay, so traditionally there are two effects in the CMB induced by neutrino masses. One is the integrated Saxwell effect that will induce a depletion in the first peak, and the other one will be an horizontal shift in the angular location of the peaks, okay? Let's start with the early integrated Saxwell effect. So as you know, the photon temperature contribution has different, the photon temperature anisotropic has different contributions. The original anisotropies, the Doppler effect, the Sachs-Wolf term, and the integrated Sachs-Wolf effect, which is this one that I highlighted, that is, it depends on the time derivatives of the potentials, okay? So in matter domination, the gravitational potential is constant, so there is no ISW effect, and the transition from the relativistic to the non-relativistic neutrino regime gets imprinted in this, okay, in this decays, okay? So it contributes to the ISW effect and induces a depletion, right here you can see, on multiples between 20 and 200, which is basically the sum of the neutrinos over 0.1%. So it's not very big. You can see here the suppression of this first peak for different neutrino masses at these different multiples, okay? On the other hand, there will be also a shift in the angular location of the peaks. Why? Because the angular location of the peaks is given by the ratio of the sound horizon to the angular diameter distance, that is Rs over dA. Rs is the distance a sound wave can travel since the beginning of the universe until recombination, and dA is the angular diameter distance from us to recombination, okay? So if we add more neutrinos, dA will increase and theta will be smaller. So they will shift to larger multiples, smaller angular scales. The higher the neutrino mass is, the lower the angular diameter distance, okay? Peaks shift to lower multiples, but this effect, of course, realize that I am increasing age. So how can I do it? Decreasing age. So there is a huge degeneracy between the Hubble parameter and the neutrino mass. If I increase the neutrino mass and I decrease the Hubble parameter, I can mimic the very same effect in the CMB. So these two effects are cancelled. But you will tell me, but CMB puts constraints on the neutrino mass. How does it do it? Via gravitational lensing, okay? There is a secondary anisotropic called lensing, right? And as you know, Einstein relativity predicts that the presence of a massive body will curve the space-time, distorting the light trajectory. The shape of the background objects will change, will be multiplied by the presence of the intervening galaxies, okay? Here I show you how a galaxy will lens a radio source, okay? And instead of just looking at the source, we will see a perfect ring, the so-called Einstein rings, which happen when the alignment between the lens, the source, and the observer is perfect. You see this beautiful Einstein ring? How is it formed? Okay. And we are so lucky that we have seen a double Einstein ring. There are probably less than 100 cases in all the universe, and we have seen one. So this will be this image from the Hubble Space Telescope is related to a 3 perfectly aligned galaxies. Okay. Okay. After this parenthesis of lensing, CMB photons are also lensed. The CMB photon path will be distorted by the presence of matter inhomogeneities between us and the last scattering surface. The deflection angle, right, is proportional to the gradient of the lensing potential. And the lensing potential measures both the matter distribution and the geometry of the universe, okay? And it has a power spectrum. But as usual, remember, neutrinos are hot relics with very large thermal velocities, reducing the clustering on small scales, and therefore reducing CMB lensing. And here I show you a plot in which you can see that the lensing potential, the lensing power spectrum, sorry, as the neutrino mass increase is reduced, okay? Or this beautiful plot from the Planck collaboration that you can see that as I increase the neutrino mass, the lensing power spectrum is reduced. So what is the constraint we have on the neutrino mass from Planck temperatural lensing measurements? 0.24 and 95% confidence level. This means, keep this in mind, that 6 million neutrinos can weigh more than 1 electron, okay? But this limit is not very tight. By far, the tightest constraints we get on neutrino masses are those induced by large-scale structure. Why? Because again, neutrino masses suppress structure formation at the scales larger than the free streaming scale when they turn non-relativistic. However, neutrinos with EV or sub-EV masses are hot relics, right? With large thermal velocities. However, colder matter instead clusters at the scale. So let me explain you this. If the wavelength of the perturbation is larger than the neutrino free streaming scale, neutrinos won't contribute to clustering. If instead the other thing happens, neutrinos will contribute to clustering. So here I show you simulations, right, of only dark matter, neutrinos, and neutrinos and dark matter. You will see that in the red ones, which are the ones with neutrinos, there is no structure at small scales. Let me show you. You see that it's like if I would have erased these small scale fluctuations compared to the blue ones. There is way more structure in the blue ones at a small scale than in the red ones. You can see this, right? In this one, you can see it clearly that there is way more structure, okay? And this is due to the fact that neutrinos are hot dark matter with very large thermal velocities, okay? So how to compute the growth of perturbations? We have the usual, here is material that you can, I'm not asking you to follow now this. This is something that you can have there, and then you can do your calculations following this formula, okay? So we have the metric, the perturbed metric, okay? The perturbed with the gravitational potentials, and the perturbed Christopher symbols. And this is an exercise just to compute the Einstein equations with perturbations, okay? We will have the Poisson equation, which is very important, and also the equations for the perturbations at first order in perturbation theory, which are these red ones. the ones for the matter over density and the ones for the velocities, okay? So using these two equations and also the Poisson equation, from these three equations, which are the ones you only need, you can compute the growth factor of structures in the universe, okay? The growth equation is this one given in this last row, delta prime prime plus 3 over A is the scale factor, plus H prime, H is the Hubble expansion of the universe, over H delta prime, equals to 3 omega m H A to the cube, delta over A squared. This is the growth equation, and this is super important. It's computed in every model of modified gravity, of the growth factor equation is a basic ingredient. In the lambda CDM model, the growth rate, which is defined as the derivative of delta over the logarithm of a, f, right, this function, the growth factor is given by omega m to the gamma, and gamma is 0.55. However, in departures from general relativity, as in modified gravity models, this lambda might change, okay? So what happens is that we have the growth factor, okay? Here I show you the growth equation. And we have always the Hubble drag, which opposes clustering, the pressure, which of course opposes clustering, and gravity, which favors clustering, okay? So there is always a famous scale that I'm sure you have heard about that is the Jeans scale. And this scale tells us when perturbations can grow in the universe, okay? So if the mode is above this Jeans scale, no growth can occur, but if it's smaller, perturbations can grow. The neutrino free streaming scale is just the Jeans scale, but with c squared replaced by the neutrino thermal velocities, okay? The dispersion velocity of the neutrino, sigma. So how can you compute this? The neutrino free streaming scale, just with this expression, as I put you here, okay? And the only thing that you need is sigma, but sigma you compute it via the Fermi-Dirac distribution of the neutrinos. So it's very easy to compute the neutrino free streaming scale, okay? So there will be, here I show you the power spectrum as I increase the neutrino mass, you see. And what happens as I increase the neutrino mass? That the power spectrum is reduced, okay? It's reduced. And the suppression of the power spectrum when I increase the neutrino mass is proportional to the fraction of neutrinos that are massive, okay? Of the dark matter that is in form of massive neutrinos, sorry, okay? So the larger the mass of the neutrinos, the more I reduce the power spectrum, okay? And this is a huge change. Remember that in the CMB, the suppression was sum m nu over 0.1%. Here is sum m nu over 0.01%. So it's a huge suppression. What is the matter power spectrum? Okay, you know, right? The matter power spectrum is a measurement of the amplitude of the fluctuations, right? And it depends on the primordial perturbation, on the transfer functions, and on the growth factor, okay? So there is a turnover that occurs basically on the matter radiation equality, okay? And it's proportional, and this power spectrum is proportional to k, to the mode, at a small case, where the transfer function is 1, okay? And the point in which the matter power spectrum decreases corresponds to the mode which enters the horizon when the universe changes from radiation to matter, okay? This is the turnover of the matter power spectrum, okay? But I'm sure you have heard about this matter power spectrum, but just to keep you in mind, what does it mean, okay? And then we have also the sigma 8 function, okay? The sigma 8 function is the integral of the power spectrum, right? Well, it's defined as the density variation when over the spheres of 8 over 8 megaparsecs, okay? So of a radius of 8 over 8 megaparsecs. So we can have also this clustering parameter, this sigma 8, defined once that we have the power spectrum and this window function, okay, defined here, okay? Where J1, this window function, this W, depends on the first order spherical Bessel function, okay? Sigma 8 is determined on, depends on how the power spectrum behaves between 0.1 and 2, between this case, okay? And you know today that there is a disagreement in the value of sigma 8, in the plane of sigma 8 versus omega m, between estimates of the CMB and estimates from lensing and also from DS. There is a small tension, but basically the largest tension is between CMB and lensing measurements, okay, in this sigma 8. This is just a parenthesis, okay? But what you should keep in mind is that neutrinos reduce the matter power spectrum, and here I show you how the matter power spectrum in this plot in the left part, right? How the matter power spectrum is reduced as I increase the neutrino mass, okay? However, then you will tell me it's super easy to measure the neutrino mass because we see the suppression of the power spectrum and we measure the neutrino mass. It's not so easy. Why? Because there could be nonlinear contributions to the matter power spectrum, okay? Linear perturbation theory will not be valid, right? And then when we enter with nonlinearities, there are coupling of the modes and such, and life is not that easy. Also notice that we are not measuring dark matter, we are measuring galaxies. And galaxies are biased tracers of the underlying matter density fields. And neutrinos themselves induce a scale-dependent bias. So how do we differentiate between this bias and this neutrino bias? Is not that easy. It's easier if we interpret, if we extract the information of matter clustering in the form of baryon acoustic oscillations instead in the form of the full shape. So what are baryon acoustic oscillations? As I tell you before, in the early universe, photons and baryons are tightly coupled and they behave as a unique fluid, right? Where matter, right, is attracted in the overdensities and pressure and the radiation pressure resist, okay? The time at which the photons are released from the drag is known as the drag epoch. And then photons expand freely while the acoustic waves freezing, right? At a scale, here I show you, right? The sound wave, and then it happens this drag period, right? At a scale that is given by the size of the horizon at the drag period, okay? And this sound speed or this sound scale is 147 plus minus 0.26 megaparsecs, okay? So this distance can be measured in the clustering of galaxies. Here I show you again. The initial overdensities, okay? In dark matter, in the gas, in photon and neutrinos, you can see that the neutrinos decouple, and then at some point, the gas, baryons, and photons decouple, and there is this overdensity at 147 megaparsecs, okay? There is the initial overdensity and then this peak. We should be able to measure this peak in the two-point galaxy correlation function. There should be an excess of clustering around a given galaxy at 147 megaparsecs. In the 80s, 1980s, we were unable to measure this because the size of the surveys were on the order of 147 megaparsecs. So no way of looking at this clustering, at this excess. In 2005, we had the first measurement, the first detection of this BAO signature. Today, we have measured this above 8 sigma in the BOS and DESI collaborations, okay? So, when dealing with neutrinos, it's much better to use the baryon oscillations than the full shape power spectrum, okay? And here I show you this. If you compare in this plot P over P max, right, versus M nu, you can see, comparing the solid with the dashed lines, that the limits I obtain for neutrinos are much better if I use BEOS than if I use the full shape power spectrum, okay? So BAO information is more powerful. Keep this in mind, okay? Very good. So limits on the neutrino mass. 0.4, just with lensing. If we add baryon acoustic oscillations, 0.12. If we add supernovae, 0.11. If we add now SDSS4, okay, in 2020, we get with this sky coverage of different tracers, luminous red galaxies, emission-like galaxies, quasars. We can improve the limit considerably, okay? Because we have more tracers. And how do we change this? The limit is, I tell you now, is 0.009, okay? And this means that 9.5 millions of the heaviest neutrinos can weigh more than 1 electron, okay? Also, these predictions are robust. So they are difficult to avoid, okay? In simple extensions of the minimal lambda CDM model. So these limits don't change much if I change the fiducial model, okay? Don't think that just changing one thing, the limits will relax, because won't be the case. It can be even further improved, okay, in other models. So without CMB, the limit is not very good, it's 0.63. But now good news, DESI, the dark energy survey data, has provided us with millions of tracers, okay, recently, okay? And we have a new limit on the neutrino mass, which is amazingly good. It's really, really nice. Here I show you the measurements of H0 from DESI, okay? And from DESI and CMB, we have a limit on the neutrino mass that is 0.072 electron volts. This means that we are here, okay? From before, we are here now, okay? If we are DESI. This means that 10 millions of the heaviest neutrinos can weigh more than 1 electron. 0.072. Realize that we are below the inverted mass ordering. But this does not imply that we have extracted the ordering, because for that we need to differentiate between one and the other, okay? But even more important, if we add GRB, luminosity distance observation, and galaxy cluster angular diameter distance, you obtain these yellow limits that are below the minimum mass detected by predicted by neutrino oscillation experiments. So look at these numbers. 0.044 below the 0.06. So there is a tension between current measurements, right? Here, I show you that we have not measured yet the neutrino mass ordering, but we are close to it. If we express things in terms of the Bayes factor, okay, that is the ratio of the Bayesian evidence, before DESI, there was no tension, and there was no indication for one hierarchy over the other, okay? After DESI, we can see, if you look to this table, please, look to B and O inverted, to the Bayes factor. There are some cases in which this Bayes factor is 47, 46, 54, 39. So there is strong evidence for normal hierarchy for some data combinations already. So we are able to measure in some, well, we have not measured it yet, but in some cases, the evidence for normal ordering is getting stronger and stronger. So cosmology is telling us more and more and more about the neutrino mass hierarchy, okay? For the future, we expect to measure it for sure. Here I show you these future Cosmo limits. We should be able to measure the minimum neutrino mass and the neutrino mass ordering with a precision of 2 sigma also, okay? So the future is brilliant with Euclid, okay? And also with CMB stage 4, that will cover basically the whole universe, okay? Here I show you what is expected, okay? We will cover it. So the error expected on the neutrino mass from CMB stage 4 and DESI is 0.02, imagine. So we should be able to measure the minimum neutrino mass with a 3 sigma precision, okay? But this will be the precision of DESI and Planck. If we include the LSST survey, we will get 0.01 eV. But as you can see, still, we cannot distinguish between M1, M2, and M3 because all these contours overlap. We need to go further. We need to get, now we can distinguish, they separate. We need to get to this precision, 0.005 in the neutrino mass. How can we get to that? Via 21 centimeter universe, via the 21 centimeter universe, okay? What is the 21 centimeter universe? The 21 centimeter universe or cosmology, right, measures, right, the hyperfine transition of neutral hydrogen. As you know, mostly all of our universe is made of hydrogen, right? And the hydrogen will be the tracer. This absorption line can be, this emission line, this hyperfine transition can be measured either in emission or in absorption with respect to the CMB, okay? At low redshifts, it will measure in emission, and at high redshifts in absorption. The square kilometer array, which will be a dedicated experiment to measure this 21 centimeter line, absorption and emission line, okay? And it will consist of 2,000 high and mid frequency dishes plus 1,000,000 low frequency antennas with an effective collecting area of 1 million meters squares, okay? And here I show you a funny picture of the Wajari Yamaji people, are indigenous in that land, and they have an agreement which protects their heritage, right? I mean, so the agreement, of course, brings them some benefits, but also they want to keep their land, right, as it is. So you can see this funny picture of these people with these radio telescopes in the background, okay? And we go to these places, right? SKA will be located mainly in these regions here. In this map, in this world map, you can see, because they are very low density. They have very low density population, okay? Funny things, just for a parenthesis, okay? The data collected by SKA in a single day would take nearly 2 million years to be broadcasted by an iPod. The SKA will be so sensitive that we'll be able to detect an airport radar on a planet tens of light years away. The dishes of the SKA will produce 10 times the global internet traffic, enough optical fiber to wrap twice around the Earth. The power of the SKA central computer will be amazed, right? So will be a super experiment, okay? This SKA, okay? And it will be able to measure the neutrino mass with an unprecedented precision, okay? Before DESI, as I told you, before DESI data, there was no tension basically between cosmological and terrestrial data. However, in the future, we predicted that there should be one. And indeed, there is a huge tension. Look at this plot. The number of sigmas versus data for two kind of models, one with lambda CDM and the other one with quintessence. You can see that the tension is always between 2 and 5 sigma. So there is a tension. There is currently a tension between 2 and 5 sigma. Another tension between cosmological and terrestrial neutrino data. And this tension can increase with future cosmological data, okay? So, what if, okay? What if a strong tension is also found in the normal, if this tension keeps growing and it's not between 2 and 5 sigma, it's between 5 and 10 sigma. Or neutrino-less double beta decay experiments detect a signal, but cosmology predicts that the sum of the neutrino masses is 0. Then we have to go to exotic scenarios, as neutrino decays, long-range neutrino interactions, time-dependent neutrino masses, non-ideal gas fluids, and keep thinking in other mechanisms, okay? So neutrinos can help in solving the H0 tension. Let's see. As you know, the H0 tension is a disagreement between 4 and 6 sigma, depending on the datasets, between estimates of the CMB from the CMB of H0 and measurements at in the local universe of H0 from a plethora of measurements, among them those performed via Cepheids, right? So it has grown significance rather than decreased significance with improvement of data. So the tension is there, okay? And from measurements, let's start first how CMB measures infers H0, okay? From measurements of the matter at various densities, given a model, there is a derivation of Rs at the last scattering redshift
Okay.
Cs. And from the position of the CMB peaks,
Yeah.
the comoving angular diameter distance is extracted. So once that we have the angular diameter distance, we can infer the Hubble constant. The question here is, could the last scattering surface be closer? Or can the CMB spots be smaller? These are the questions, because it seems that the value of the H0 measures by the CMB is 4 to 6 sigma lower than the value measured by Cepheids. How do we solve this problem? We can change dA or we can change Rs, right? So there are early universe solutions in which they change both Rs and dA at recombination to have a higher H0, and late universe solutions which change dA at recombination to have also the same effect. But it's not that easy, because we have to leave unchanged the angular location of the peaks and also the diffusion damping. So let's start with the easier one. A larger number of neutrino species. A larger number of neutrino species will implies a larger expansion rate in the universe. dA at recombination needs to be smaller, and therefore we will have a higher H0. However, this effect is degenerate with others, and if we add an effective, we still have a 3.4 sigma tension. We can alleviate it a bit, but the tension will be still there, okay? What about interacting neutrinos? These are very important, because interacting neutrinos shift the power spectrum toward different scales and boost the fluctuation amplitude, reducing the physical sound horizon at last scattering, and then we will have a smaller value of dA. So interacting neutrinos will induce a smaller value of dA, which will require a larger value of H0. So in principle, interacting neutrinos can solve the issue. For instance, if we add this effective for fermion operator, in which we have a G effective, right? Neutrinos will experience scattering after decoupling. And increasing this G effective, with this effective for fermion interaction, with this heavy mediator, will delay neutrino free stream. And it turns out that there is a strongly interacting mode in this model, in this interacting neutrino model. Here you can see it. Look at the red contours compared to the lambda CDM ones, in which H0 can be considerably larger, okay? This is a strongly interacting neutrino mode, okay? However, these contours, when we consider the polarization measurements, they are no longer favored. So if you look here at this distribution, when we add high polarization measurements, the value of H0 is still shifted, is again shifted towards smaller values. So here I show you that self-interacting neutrinos cannot help much, okay? What about models with a majoron, okay? With another particle, with a light particle interacting with neutrinos. They can relax a bit the Hubble tension. And here you see that the tension is notably reduced, here in this case, models with majorons. And also, models in which we have interacting neutrinos, interacting stellar neutrinos, okay? A self-interacting stellar neutrino can help a lot also in solving the H0 tension. So interacting neutrino models are very appealing scenarios that in some cases can help in solving the H0 tension. And as you can see, they are among the excellent models. Self-interacting stellar neutrinos. If we consider not stellar neutrinos, but interacting regular neutrinos, standard neutrinos, they are promising models, but the tension still remains at the 3 sigma. But the tension can be reduced down to just one statistical fluctuation with sterile, if sterile neutrinos are added into the model, Okay, so keep looking for non-standard mechanism, guys, because there is an emerging tension between between measurements of neutrino masses from terrestrial experiments, oscillation experiments, and cosmological experiments, and also neutrinos can help in solving the so-called Hubble constant tension. Okay, so with this, I'm almost done. Okay, and let me tell you the final messages I want you to convey. Okay, we should convey. So, neutrino masses and abundances have key signature in the different cosmological observables. So far, there is no hint for neutrino masses. Realize that the limit is going down and down and down. We have a limit today of 0.05 eV, the tightest limit we have. And there is no hint for extra radiation. Extra radiation is the radiation is measured between is 2.99 plus minus 0.35 at 95% confidence level. Ineffective, how is it measured? Via helium-4 light element abundances, helium-4, okay, VBN, and also in the CMB in the highest multiple region, the highest multiples in the damping tail, okay? And effective is required to be 2.99 plus minus 0.3, basically at 95% confidence level. From Planck lensing, perfectly consistent with VBN estimates. Cosmology provides currently the tightest bound to neutrino masses. Neutrino masses at the CMB, they are measured via gravitational lensing, right? Even though they have also an effect in the first peak and also a shift in the angle in the location of the peaks. However, these effects are quite degenerate with other cosmological parameters. At large scale structure, we have the free streaming of these neutrinos. The tightest 2 sigma limit we find without including a local without including a local a prior on the Hubble constant from Schultz, for instance, we get is 0.05 eV, and this leads to a strong preference for normal ordering, with bias factor of the order of 46. So, and even more interesting, depending on the dataset combination and how do we measure the tension, there is a tension between cosmological and terrestrial observations between 2.5 and 5 sigma. So keep working on neutrinos because they are exciting and they can give us many, many more surprises. And thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Olga. This was, I'm sure I speak for everyone, this was very informative and everyone is very much wiser on neutrino cosmology. So do we have questions? There's Sayantan.
Thank you, ma'am, for this amazing talk. I mean, like especially the high energy phenomenology part was excellent. So actually, I have just maybe two short questions. So the first one, could you show the part where you have taken the Fermi four vertices interaction, like G of like neutrino, antineutrino, etc.?
Well, it's not my model; it's the model of C.
Yeah. Yes. So I am just asking that, I mean, you are also talking when the neutrinos are Marijuana, right? I mean, when you are taking the Marijuana as a, so how does the four interacting vertices appear? Like, as far I understand, like the Marijuana, neutrino and antineutrino are the same, right? I mean, even though the double beta decay were probably negative. And second of all, this is not renormalizable, right? I mean, the simple dimension correction. So I am just asking that, could we really push it to this model further for the cosmological extreme? So I just wanted your comment.
It's just a phenomenological scenario. I mean, it's an effective, indeed, it's not renormalizable, it's an effective interaction, right? And I think that it's independent of the neutrino character. Even if it's neutrino Dirac or Majorana, I think that it does not depend this. You can write it in both cases, okay?
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm asking that could you use the, say, some Higgs type of mechanism or like the Weinberg-Salam model to at least take care of the neutrino mass in like that way? So that's what I was wondering that. I mean, would it be relevant or like is it just a twitching a parameter?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay. And second question is that could you go to the covariant curvature formulation, like where you took the FLRW perturbation and yeah. So basically before the gene sense stability. Yeah, so I am wondering that when you take the FLRW perturbation, so you typically have to choose a gauge, right? I mean, it seems like you have taken conformal Newtonian gauge, but the point is that what I am wondering, as far I understand the cosmological phenomenology, that the conformal Newtonian gauge is only good when the T mu nu is 0. Here, because you have a non-trivial T mu nu because of the dark matter, shouldn't the Sasaki-Mukhanov variable and others important? No, because the spectral density would affect the gauge choice, right? I mean, that's what I am wondering. It should be independent of gauge.
Yeah, exactly. The observable should be independent, but to compute the growth factor is easier to work in the Newtonian gauge. But you can get the, I guess, in the synchronous gauge, you can work out the equations and you will get the same one. I mean, with the other with the other perturbation metric, right? I mean, so metric perturbation, sorry. You will get but I mean, to compute the growth factor usually is more visual to do it with the Newtonian gauge, basically because the Newtonian limit of the growth of this equation, right? Of the 0, component, right? Is easier. But basically, you neglect the derivatives of this, right? To get the small scale approximation to the Poisson equation, which is this one here, right? That small scale, right? The Newtonian limit. So then you ignore this. Normally, I usually work in this gauge because it's for the case of the growth equation. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I have seen the Shizukawa or how Sasaki does. They actually go to the uniform curvature gauge because they are the T00, the rho is independent. So they choose the Sasaki-Mukhanov variable and then they compute the, I mean, they get the same factor, but the drag term would be little different. I mean, so in the Shizukawa's paper and other Sasaki's original paper, say, yeah, actually. So yeah, that's what I was little wondering that, I mean, because in cosmology, we are told that when T mu nu is not 0 and the T00 term is important, it's better to use the uniform curvature gauge or the uniform density gauge.
Yeah, I think I took a look long ago, but I should take a look to Kodama and Sasaki.
No, it's a running comment. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. So very interesting talk. I mean, yeah. Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Excellent. So there's also Ayush.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. I used once genes instability for structure formation study, but I never understood know that this can be applied for cosmic study as well. Like, how do we introduce genes instability criteria into cosmic study, ma'am?
Yeah, I mean, the gene scale is really just a scale, as its name says, right? And it's just a competition between gravity and pressure, and it depends on the sound speed of the fluid, right? In this case, the fluid is the neutrino background, let's say, and then instead of having a sound speed, what you have is the dispersion velocities, right? So instead of here having CS squared, you have sigma, and sigma squared, of course. And that's it. I mean, then you compute it, but you can apply this gene scale to a plethora of possible fluids, okay? So you can just compute it as easy as this, the free streaming scale, and which is the gene scale. In this case, it's not called gene scale, it's called free streaming scale. And it's the fact that having dispersion velocities will not allow some scales to cluster, okay? If you don't have, if this term is 0, of course, if there is no sound speed, any scale will cluster, okay? You will have clustering at any scale. But if the fluid has some, either you have an astrophysical fluid with sound speed or a background of particles with non-negligible thermal velocities, you will have also an equivalent scale that in this case is free streaming scale. That is, neutrinos will wash out is this scale, right? As this picture, right? Will wash out these small scale fluctuations, and that we have seen perfectly in these simulations. Okay.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. In physical meaning wise, like that C square is telling us about the speed of neutrinos in that fluid medium, or it's something else?
Exactly. This sigma is telling us the relative, the relative motion of neutrinos. Yeah, exactly. The thermal motion of neutrinos somehow. Okay. they are not cold dark matter. In cold dark matter, there is no free streaming scale because sigma is 0, okay? CS squared, if you want, is 0, okay? So in cold dark matter, you have clustering at any scale, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Understood, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, can I ask a quick question again? Sorry if that is possible.
Sure.
Yeah. So could you go back to your Mellon diagram in the initial where you took the neutrino-neutrino interaction? That is the closed Feynman graphs. Yeah. So the non-renormalizability was getting some extra correction like the like the weird Feynman diagrams, right? The Mellon diagrams. I am just asking that where you are talking about. So in the renormalization group, where do we take the say Dyson series? So I was just wondering that, I mean, in LSD formalism, I mean, this is a extra contribution. I mean, I'm asking that whether this contribution would be visible in the, say, beta function, which has been like calculated very precisely in colliders, etc. So I'm just asking from a high energy high energy point of view. I mean, what would be the effect of phenomenology except for neutrino? Like if you are calculating some other fermion or mesons interaction, so such a interaction can show in the beta function of this or what?
Yeah, sure, of course, should show. I mean, should modify any kind of rate will modify the effective equation of a state, any additional interaction rate, right? As electromagnetic interactions do, right? So you are
Yeah,
thinking
but
an extra exotic one. Yeah, but I mean, it depends, of course, on the strength of the interaction compared to the.
yeah, so I was wondering that in the QED, I guess the correction is up to 5 loop correction is already done. Like the first loop correction was done by the Swinjar itself, the 5 loops. So I am just wondering that if such a contribution is prevalent, like why doesn't it show up in the standard QED literature? So it was just a question from my.
Which interaction? The effective one.
So the Milan type of extra interaction that you are doing. So like the how QED, say the higher order loop correction is done. So the I guess up to like the 3 or 5th loop correction, the calculation has been done, right? The anomalous magnetic moment or something like that. So I'm just wondering that whether these diagrams, some extra contribution has already been taken in the standard QED experiments or hadronic experiment, or it is a extra contribution we should look at.
I think they didn't. No, it's not considered. No. We should look at.
Okay. I see. Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am. Sure. Thank you.
Everyone is very happy, and has learned a lot in this. So thank you again, Olga.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.